So a funny thing happened on the way to this conference. As I was coming in, I ran into my friend Holly, and I said, "Hey Holly, have you ever noticed how at academic conferences, everybody always..." I'm not actually going to finish that joke because stand-up comedy is not my forte. But my decision to open my closing remarks with this phrase continues a venerable line of stand-up comedy, especially early 20th century vaudeville that often began with the line, "A funny thing happened on the way to the theater." In breaking the fourth wall this way, vaudeville and other theater performers in America, many of whom have been and continue to be Jewish, created a sense of informality, of a connection between the performer and the audience. This move also breaks down the division between insider and outsider, a distinction that Jews, both immigrants in America and those in the old country, were all too familiar with. Because the theater is a place of make-believe, of pretending, where you can be anybody you want to be, it can be a place of inclusion, and therefore good for people on the margins, perhaps accounting for the outsized presence of Jews in the field. Two of these Jews were responsible for the musical that has most direct influence in the title of this conference, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which itself, of course, crosses all kinds of cultural boundaries, often in silly ways, and plays on the original Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Theater. In a more serious vein, as our friend Mark Slobin has pointed out, the theater and theatricality have in fact long been a part of Jewish life, including in religious ritual both at home and in synagogue. The historian Stephen Ashheim has also observed that theatricality has historically also been an essential survival strategy for Jews in their daily non-religious lives, as they have sought to blend in by dissembling, sometimes actively hiding their Jewish identity in order to avoid discrimination or worse. The theater, along with the synagogue, has also functioned for immigrants in particular as a place of comfort and an aid in making sense of a new environment, creating a bridge between familiar old customs and their new home. The Jewish immigrant theater has a good deal in common with other early 20th century immigrant theaters, especially the German theater, which was another place where Jews belonged to multiple identity categories, both on stage and off, seeking to associate themselves with certain categories while pulling away from others with varying degrees of success. Our own lives today consist of multiple cultural categories and identities defined by ways of acting, beliefs, conventions, and assumptions about other people's behaviors in that category or context. Categories are a way of making sense of the world, of giving shape to the stream of events, sometimes chaotic around us, and to those in which we participate. Often the divisions or boundaries between these categories are not strong, and therefore permeating them or moving between them causes no friction or conflict. But sometimes crossing those boundaries causes tremendous problems due to the differential and cultural conventions or behavioral expectations. This conference has explored both kinds of boundary crossings, raising the question of the significance of these crossings, the question of what is at stake. Sometimes it's clear, such as when there are financial implications in upsetting paying audiences who expect a performer to adhere to certain conventions of expression or personal behavior. Sometimes it's less clear, as when anxiety over crossing boundaries is driven by a vague sense that even small changes could lead down a slippery slope and ultimately redefine the cultural category in a way that is not desirable to those who feel they represent it. Musical boundary crossing and hybridity more generally arguably became the defining feature of a great deal of music of all styles and genres over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries thus far. Consequently, we now regard the past through a lens of heightened awareness of cultural categories and boundaries, meaning that we should be aware of our own historical perspective, how our own historical perspective influences our perception of the past. It is undeniable, though, that as long as there has been any sense of the distinction between religious and non-religious arenas in human society, the music performed in these different spheres has been of a hybrid sort that blends influences of both the secular and the sacred. A funny thing did actually happen on the metaphorical way to this conference. Funny not in the sense of laughing humor, but funny in the sense of ironic, in that for a little while we thought we might need to hold part of this conference at a synagogue. In these uncertain times, it remains the case that a synagogue and a Hillel can be a safe space for Jews when safety at other places is not a certainty. To some, the synagogue may also seem constraining, to others, liberating. The synagogue, in any case, continues to be a reference point for both Jews and non-Jews, for that matter, as a place of Jewishness, and it continues to be true that sometimes we may be surprised at what happens to our thinking on the way there, or on the way back, or even when just going past it metaphorically, as we contemplate it as a space of tradition and memory. Thank you all.